Um, I think we're okay. If you hold on for a second. Hello? Hello? Did you see the email that I sent that was to become a register to come over to a panelist? Because you all can get into.
All right, looks like we are having some attendees logging in addition to our panelists.
I'm going to enable my video. And
So welcome everyone to the DCAAP Spring Symposium. Hello, everyone. My name is Nate. I'm the IT person. I'll be conducting the symposium, at least the IT part of it. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Got audio. Just say yes in chat if you can hear me. Awesome. See a lot of yeses. Awesome. So we'll be getting started shortly. Sorry for the delay. We're just waiting for a few more people to get in.
The census is coming! Count me! Count for me! Count me! Count me! Count us! Count us!
Far too often, kids are not counted. In fact, the last census missed nearly 2 million children under age 5 nationwide.
A mistake like that hurts kids for the next 10 years.
The census informs funding for roads and hospitals, but also what kids need: libraries, schools, childcare programs, and more. So make sure you count everyone in your home, including all children in the 2020 census.
Hi, this is Lenore. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you so much for bearing with the virtual platform. We were really excited to continue on with the Spring Symposium for DCAAP. I know that it's been a really challenging time for all of us, and we did debate canceling the symposium, but really felt strongly that it was so important for us to move forward. We hope that this is a nice break for you from COVID. And really kind of enforces two things, not only the importance of the census and the implication for children, particularly under 3 years of age, and then next steps regarding the Census 2020, specifically in the times of COVID, and what action we can take as caregivers and providers for our patients and families in the district and surrounding areas. So again, I just wanted to reintroduce myself. I'm Lenore. I did take over the presidency early from Encore Shaw, who is now working for the Department of Health in DC. He decided to step down, as most of you know, due to concerns for conflicts of interest. That being said, we're very excited to continue our partnership with Encore Shaw, knowing that it just strengthens DCAAP's bonds with the District Department of Health. As I've said, we have a really exciting lineup today, several keynote speakers and panelists that are experts in the census, and we were so excited to have them be available for us, even despite the craziness of what's going on. And so I don't want to belabor this. I want to just thank our sponsors and then go ahead and introduce our speakers. So we have two sponsors today for today's Spring Symposium. We're sorry that it can't be in person. I know that we love to network and have dinner and dessert and see each other's faces and interact, but we're really appreciative of Bainum and the American Dairy Association Northeast for continuing to sponsor this event, even though we've had to pivot and make it a virtual platform. With that, I'd like to actually introduce our first speaker. Tim Olson serves as the Associate Director for Field Operations with executive responsibility for data collection conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau for all surveys and censuses. Tim Olson began his career at the Census Bureau in 1987 as a temporary employee in the Seattle region during the 1990 and 2000 censuses, and he joined the Census Bureau's headquarters team in 2001, supporting Field Division Census Program. In 2013, he became the agency's first respondent advocate, and in 2015 became the Chief of Field Division. Olson is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Commerce Department's Gold and Silver Awards and 2 Census Bureau Bronze Medal Awards, and the Director's Award for Innovation. With that, I'd like Tim Olson, if you can, virtual on, and we're very excited to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Here we go. I bet you can hear me now, right?
Yes, we can.
Awesome, awesome. Lenore, are you going to do the slides for me, or do you want me to show them just on my own desktop?
I think we can do the slides for you. Just go ahead and say next slide. And
You
then
just
that
made
brings
me
up a
very happy.
great point. Tim, after you're finished presenting, if it's still all right with you, we'll have the opportunity for audience members to ask questions. If those who are at home watching the presentation would like to enter their questions in the chat box, we will have Tim answer them at the conclusion of his presentation.
And one other technical question, I'm getting a prompt to say I should start my video. Do you want me to do that?
I think in the lower left-hand corner, if you feel comfortable starting your video, it's something I declined to do. Great, it's great to see you, Tim.
Oh, now you can see me.
Now
Oh,
we
good.
can see you.
I'm learning technology, probably like a lot of other people.
Yeah, I think we all are. And then Tysus, do you want to go ahead and advance the slides?
Very cool.
Thank you.
I will, if it's okay, let me just start up. And I know we've got some outstanding speakers that are following me. And they're really going to get into the nuts and bolts of how to improve the count of young children. But what I want to do is really go through and really talk about some of the nuts and bolts of conducting the 2020 census to help put it in context as we are, in a national crisis and in an unprecedented situation. I just want to share with you what is happening right now, how this affects people right now, and how people are being counted right now. So that's what I'll focus on. Let's go to the next slide. So I think many of you that are part of this webinar, you know already that the census counts every 10 years affect our nation for a decade, not only representation in the US House, but they also affect the Electoral College. And for the 2020 census, that means the numbers coming out of 2020 will directly influence the makeup of the Electoral College, which elects our president in 2024 and 2028. So big stuff. And also it affects local and state legislative districts using the data that comes out of the census. Most people are increasingly aware that besides the representational component of the census, which is baked into the US Constitution, census data is also used for resources. Based on the census study that we did a couple of years ago, our number says $675 billion every single year in federal funds that are used and allocated to local communities for schools, hospitals, transportation, senior programs, children's programs, so many things that we all rely upon. Another study from Andy Reamer out of Brookings just a few months ago came out with his own analysis, says there's actually $1.5 trillion every year in federal monies that are allocated based on the census numbers. I don't know which one is right. I just know it's a lot of money, and it directly affects how every one of us in this nation, how we live, and not just right now, not just in 2021, but all the way through until we do the next census. So that's so core to why the count has to be accurate. It affects everybody in this nation. Let's go to the next slide. So this is my fourth census. The first two were, as a temporary employee in the Seattle region. I was always over the operational side, conducting census in multiple states that our region was responsible for. And it's interesting, in light of 2020, with all of the issues that have been headline grabbing for the last year and a half, 2 years, over citizenship, over funding for the census, you name it. The challenges we have in this census are really very similar to those we've had in other censuses. But what we know is that the message about the census is still pretty much the same. It's really important. This census more than ever it's easier than ever before, and the census is safe. It's confidential by law. We cannot provide any data to anybody outside of the Bureau. That includes immigration authorities, FBI, IRS. That includes any other federal agency, any for-profit, not-profit. Anybody outside the Bureau cannot access the individual level data for 72 years. And then we publicly put it out there, and genealogists eat this stuff up. That's really important in this census, where immigration has been such a hot topic nationwide. The other challenge we always have, and this is really the focus of this webinar, is we always have had undercounts of certain populations, renters, people of color, American Indians and Alaska Natives, the most undercounted population in the US, young children. I know that this was described at the very beginning of this webinar, that we missed literally a lot of young children under the age of 5. And I know we will talk about that later on, some of the dynamics that create that. But our challenge at the Bureau, this census, is to reduce or lower those undercounts as much as possible so that the end result is really an accurate census. Let's go on to the next slide. So we have an additional challenge, one that was not on our playbook. And of course, everybody in the nation is dealing with this, and pretty much on a day-by-day basis trying to figure out how do we move forward. The coronavirus, this has certainly affected the census. We recently announced a 2-week delay to the field operations for 2020. And then just this past Saturday, we announced publicly an additional 2-week delay until April 15th. And I can pretty much assure you that there will be an additional announcement at some point fairly soon. But this has directly affected our ability to do the on-the-ground parts of the census where there's people interaction. We had just extended jobs to over 600,000 people. People had accepted these jobs, and then they were starting the onboarding process to work in the field. That is on hold. We had field operations for group quarters and for people experiencing homelessness to have already begun in the field just a few days ago. Those are on hold. We've got rural parts of the country where the way we deliver the questionnaires is by in-person census takers. It's about 7 million total addresses in the country, literally scattered throughout the country. It's where they've got P.O. Box or rural route delivery, that kind of thing. We got 2 days into the field operation, and then we shut it down. And so we are on a daily basis figuring out next steps because we are committed to conducting the census. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But the one thing that is going really fantastic in spite of this national crisis, the one thing that is really not just exciting, but it means a lot because it's working, is that as of this morning, more than 50 million households have already responded to the census online, over the phone, and some with paper forms. And that's a little bit ahead of what we expected at this date in the census data collection process. So it tells me, one, people are at home. And so it's maybe easier for them than if they were running to and from work so hard. That might be contributing. The other thing is I think we've been very successful in this decade in getting the message out how important the census is. The advertising starting to run. We've got over 300,000 organizations that are partners with us, are getting the word out to their own communities. Just the massive outpouring from so many people and so many organizations throughout the nation. I think that's contributing to this higher than expected response rate at this juncture. And we haven't even finished all the mailings that go to households. So I'm pretty excited about that. Let's go to the next slide. So let me get into the nuts and bolts if I could. First of all, people can respond right now in 3 primary ways. They can do it online. They can do it over the phone. We've got phone operators at 10 different sites throughout the country, and they can do it with paper. Every household received multiple invitations to participate. This started this middle of March, and the languages people can respond in is obviously English, Spanish, and several additional non-English languages. Over the phone, we've got in-language operators that can actually receive the information. I've listed all the languages on this slide. If you speak one of those languages, you will quickly know what it is. If you don't, you probably can guess. It's several Asian languages, Arabic, several European languages, and Haitian Creole. What happens is, in the normal census world, we expect about 60.5% of all households to self-respond. If they do it on their own, we don't have to do anything other than invite them over the mail. And as I mentioned, 50 million plus have already done so. And then we follow up with households in person with approximately 500,000 temporary census hires. Normally, in the normal world, which we're not in anymore, but in the normal world, that would have begun in early May. And we would have been done with all the data collection by the end of July. And then the post-processing process takes on a whole life of its own. And then we deliver counts to the president for apportionment purposes no later than December 31st of the year we take the census. So let's go on to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the actual questions that are on the form. It's so simple. We want to know how many people are in each house, apartment, or mobile home. We ask for the names of each person. We want to know the relationship of the individuals in the household to the householder. That's the person usually filling out the form, or the person who pays the rent or pays the mortgage. You know, it's whoever they want to choose as the householder. The sex of each person, male or female, the age, if each person is of Hispanic origin or not, the race, and do they own or rent their home. So what is not on the form? We do not ask citizenship. We do not ask anything to do with finances, no bank accounts, no credit card numbers. We do not ask for social security numbers. We never ask for political donations. So I bring that up because there's a lot of scams that go on during the census year. So if you hear people that are being asked these things that are not on the form, simply let us know. We've got a 24/7 tracking. We're in touch with law enforcement to report these things where there's scams going on, where people are potentially being victimized, and we take that seriously. Let's go on to the next slide. And this goes to the heart of the matter as far as counting young children. Who should be included on the form? And I've taken a screenshot of what is a paper questionnaire. And right at the very beginning, it articulates who should be counted and who should not be counted. And so you can see in that first statement, count all people, including babies, who live and sleep here most of the time. And then when you put in that number, there's a follow-up question. Let's go to the next slide. We ask, and this is a probe question, which is new for 2020, were there any additional people staying here on April 1st that you did not include in question 1? Mark all that apply: children related or unrelated, such as newborn babies, grandchildren, foster children, relatives, adult children, cousins or in-laws, non-relatives such as roommates or live-in babysitters, and people staying here temporarily. We know from our research that when you ask a probe question where they're responding on their own, they look at that and they start thinking, oh, I'm supposed to include the young kids. Oh, I'm supposed to include people that are not part of my family that actually live in my household. This particular probe question will go further in reducing the undercounted young children than probably most anything any of us can do. So we're hopeful that as people interact with the form, either online or over the phone or with the paper form, that this is going to further reduce that undercount so that we end up with a truly accurate count at the end. Let's go to the next slide. So there's a lot of advertising. You've probably seen some of it on television. You've seen it probably online. You probably are seeing it some outdoor, out-of-home advertising. It's in English and 12 non-English languages. And recently, and you'll start seeing this day after tomorrow on April 1st, we've actually taken existing ad content and we've modified it just ever so slightly so it is relevant during this crisis. And we're calling it a post-recovery ad, a recovery ad, and it focuses on acknowledging the crisis we're in, but looking forward that we will get through this crisis, and that's why we need accurate counts, because this affects all of us for the next decade after this crisis is passed. You'll start seeing that we're getting some rave reviews from our stakeholders that have reviewed it, and they go, good job. I mentioned that we've got a lot of partners and organizations that are pushing the message out to their communities. We've got over 10,000 complete count committees. We've actually got, 341,000 organizations that are actively involved pushing this out. You'll notice on the slide in red, I put digitally. And these are things that were intended to be conducted, with face-to-face, on-the-ground interactions with populations that we're really focusing on to make sure that they're included. All of our partners, just like us, have had to rethink, how do you do outreach in this environment where you've got to social distance yourselves? Everybody's thinking that through. So we've got a school program that has gone into digital. Just this past weekend, we had thousands of faith-based organizations, churches, mosques, synagogues, temples. They were going to do a weekend of worship focused on the census, in-person services. They moved that more into a digital platform. And you can see all the different things that are going on here. I think what's happening right now is everybody is rethinking, how do you outreach in this environment where you can't do the face-to-face? Let's move on to the next slide. This is what to expect over the next several months. Obviously, we've got an ad campaign that will go through the summer. We actually conducted the very first enumeration in Tooksuk Bay, Alaska, January 21st. The director of the Bureau and myself were up there doing that. It was a little chilly, but it was a great experience to count the very first person in the United States for the 2020 census. We've done a lot of recruiting for these temporary employees. We had a goal of 2.67 million applicants. Right now, we've got a little more than 2.8 million people that have applied for these jobs. With all that's happening in the nation, we know that we may need to recruit more people because some of the applicants that we've got may no longer want to work in the door-to-door kind of job. So we have kept our online recruiting site alive and open. And once we are on the ground back in business, we may be pushing out some targeted recruitment messaging in selected areas where we don't quite have enough. So we talked about the invitation letters that are going out to households. That started March 12th. That'll go through nearly the end of April. Census Day reference is April 1st. The self-response phase is already available online, where you can see at your national, state, county, city, and even at the neighborhood level, exactly what the current response rate is for each of those areas. 2020census.gov, and you'll be able to stumble upon that online mapping tool. It's pretty cool. My neighborhood in DC, we are underperforming. We are a less of a response than the District of Columbia as a whole. So that kind of stabs me in the heart, because I live in this particular neighborhood and I'm going, wait a second, these are my neighbors. So even though I'm out walking my dogs in the neighborhood, anybody I see, as long as we're several feet away, I do say, hey, have you answered your census? Of course, they all say, oh, of course, of course. Well, I don't know if they're telling me the truth or not, because we're not doing so well here in this neighborhood, but I'm going to keep reminding them. This is the next part I just want to briefly mention. We are all of the under number 6, non-response follow-up and other field operations. Like I said earlier, they would have already started on the ground. We've put a delay in place, and we are analyzing on a daily basis based on the health conditions of the nation. And we are currently on a delay for any of these happening until at least April 15th. But My expectation is that will be delayed further, just with common sense. And so we are refiguring out the step forward and how do you collect this information from people that haven't self-responded on their own. So let's go to the next slide. And this is just a link that a series of links. You can see our promotional materials, a lot of public information about the census, the job site that we have. People can apply for these jobs. And I've put in the last link there, which is the site you go to see how your state, your city, your county, and even your neighborhood is doing in terms of self-response. We update this every single day. Right now, it will reflect, I think it's over 33% self-response. And as I mentioned earlier, that's over 50 million households in the US. I'm going to stop for now and turn it back over to Lenore.
Yeah, great. So as a reminder, if you have any questions for Tim, that was great. Thank you so much. Very informative and helpful. Please feel free to write it in the Zoom webinar chat. And I actually have two questions of my own, Tim, if that's all right. The first is, obviously COVID is throwing a wrench, a pretty significant wrench, it seems, in a lot of these efforts. You mentioned that next steps are ongoing and perhaps changing, I imagine, daily and certainly week to week. But do you have any kind of indication of what some of these next steps or pivots are other than virtual platforms?
Well, we're going to continue pushing self-response. We've actually increased our advertising buy, and we've increased the intensity of that advertising in markets where it's underperforming, where the responses are underperforming. Because the one thing we know is, getting a self-response in is the easiest for people to do because no census worker is going to come knocking on their door. And in this environment, no census taker wants to knock on anybody's door, nor would we ask them to do so. So that's the first thing. The other part of an accurate census is obviously following up with households that, for whatever reason, haven't self-responded. We can't put out data. We can't put out counts to the president for apportionment or redistricting or any of the other purposes unless we've done a complete count. And that includes what we call non-response follow-up. It's the largest operation of the census. It involves over 500,000 temporary hires. They usually work 6 to 8 weeks in their community, knocking on doors, talking to people, making repeated visits until they find them at home and they're get an agreement with that householder to respond. And we have to go till we're at 100% complete. Right now, that's the kicker. How do we do that? Because nobody knows, nobody knows when it really is going to be safe throughout the nation and in areas of the nation for people to begin living, what we used to know as a regular life. That's the unknown. And so obviously, we're going to progressively be putting out updates to the public and to our stakeholders over what are the next steps. We have to do that non-response follow-up or we can't issue a count.
Have you ever been able to do that follow-up by telephone, or that becomes tricky and people don't answer?
Well, we've done, we do surveys all the time. And what we found in the last about 4 years is outbound calling to do data collection. It dwindled down from what used to be about a 25% incoming data collection to almost zero. People don't pick up their phones anymore. And so that doesn't really work very well for us. And all of these non-responding households, they will have received 6 or possibly 7 mailers. And unless they are not connected, in any kind of a social media environment, or they never watch TV, or they never listen to the radio, assuming that people do some of those components television, radio, online, etc., they will have seen the ads. We will have reached our research says we will have reached every person more than 99 times. And that's 99.9% of the population will have seen our ads 99 plus times by the time we're done. So, you know, it's not due to lack of, I think, knowledge or awareness. I think there's always a sector of the population that until you are in front of them and you are at their door asking for this very minimal information, you won't be able to get that. I don't know if that's a long-winded answer.
No, I think that's great.
But-
And then actually during the time that you answered, we have several questions. If that's all right, I'm going to read it out to you, Tim.
Mhm.
One of our members asks, what do you do about college students who are staying in parents' homes temporarily? And
Yeah.
how about the people who've moved away from their usual home because of COVID? For example, New Yorkers moving north.
Yeah, great questions. The moment that we knew that we had a crisis going on, we started, evaluating what we call residency criteria, which are public online, is where should people be counted. And in the normal census, college students are counted either in the dorm that they live in, and we use administrative records from the university or college, so the student doesn't even know we're counting them. But those living off campus, they're usually counted through a regular enumeration process. They're invited as, living at an address off campus. They're in the natural flow of getting the invitations, responding online, and if they haven't, then we follow up with them in non-response follow-up. Well, that's the rub right now. So many kids, virtually every university is canceled live classes. Students have either been home or gone somewhere. So we are working, one, to get the message out that college students, you should be counted where you live or sleep most of the time throughout the year, and probably that's back at the college location. Even if you're temporarily away, living with your parents or other people because of the coronavirus, you should be counted at that location. We're working through how do you operationalize that. So one of the things that we're doing is through the universities, getting a campaign out to their students that are off campus about how to respond to make sure they're selecting the right address. We're also looking at some other options that we're still underway on that. In terms of people that temporarily have left their regular home, let's say in New York, I've heard various numbers of how many people have left the city. They should be counted where they usually live or sleep most of the time, even if they're temporarily away from their usual address.
Thanks, Tim. Another respondent or attendee said a lot of the advertising and questionnaires go out in English, and that people who don't read English might be likely to kind of toss it, throw it away, or delete it. Have you sent out invitations in other languages like Spanish?
So about, and I'm not going to get the number right here, but about 20% of the US where Spanish is spoken by one or more household members, or let me put it a different way, where English is not spoken by one or more of the adult family members and Spanish is, we have sent what we call a bilingual questionnaire package to those addresses. And of course, there's going to be English-only speaking people in those areas, as well as a large concentration of Spanish-speaking individuals. So they're getting mailing packages if they're in an area that has large numbers of Spanish-speaking households. They're getting that. Also, nationwide, wherever you happen to be, in the mailing packages that we send, there is messaging in English and the additional 12 non-English languages. And somebody it's a very simple sheet of paper that's added into the letter. And if somebody reads that would point them either to a unique calling number that they can respond over the phone in that language, or drives them to the website that has that language specific in how to respond in that language. We also have 59 language assistance guides. They're basically videos online that anybody can use. A lot of our partners are using it with their populations to help people that speak a language other than the 13 supported languages to help them understand how to fill out, in that case, the 13 or the English-based form.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask you one last question, but there are a couple of questions in the question and answer chat box at the bottom, Tim, that we didn't get to. As I introduce C. Marie James, perhaps you could, if you've got time and you can see them, answer in the chat field some of the answers to the questions we didn't get to. The last question I would just ask of you, Tim, is most of the folks on the line today are pediatricians and or work in pediatric practices. Do you have any last kind of asks for us in terms of the census?
So I guess my biggest ask is through all of your networks, particularly in your clinical settings or your hospital settings or your practices, as you see families with young children during this time of response, if you could simply remind them in an appropriate way, hey, it's important to be counted in the census, whether you're a citizen or a non-citizen. If you live in this country, respond to the census, and be sure that your young children are counted. They are absolutely critical to be in the count. I would ask folks to do that. I know that there's obviously big ticket items going on in the country right now. But I think merging this into your client care, merging that in, because it does affect all of the kids that you see. It affects them for the next decade. I would appreciate it if you did that.
All right, thank you so much, Tim. We really appreciate it. Our next panelist is C. Marie James. I'm very excited to introduce her as well. She is the Senior Vice President of Policy at the National Black Child Development Institute, or the NBCDI. In this role, she leads advocacy work at the national level, developing and implementing strategies to influence and shape government policies and raise public awareness on issues that impact Black children's education and overall health and well-being. C. Marie also provides technical assistance and training to NBCDI's national affiliate network in advocating for policy solutions at the state and local levels. Prior to joining the NBCDI, C. Marie was a senior policy analyst at the Center for Law and Social Policy, or CLASP, and she was also the lead operations specialist at the Illinois Department of Human Service from 2009 to 2011, and an inaugural fellow in the Illinois Early Childhood Fellows Program. I'd like to welcome C. Marie James.
Hi, thank you so much. I am here with my baby. I was assured that it was okay that she's joining me. She's going to read a book, and I am going to do my best to present just with this unpredictable time right now. Childcare and yeah, just did not work out this evening. So I'm really happy to take this time to present on behalf of the National Black Child Development Institute about how important it is that in particular we reach Black children and families. Just a little bit about our organization. We've been around 50 years. Our mission is to improve and advance the quality of life for Black children and families through education and advocacy. We focus on early childhood education, health and wellness, family engagement, literacy, child welfare, and policy and advocacy. So why we as an organization prioritize supporting the census and getting folks out, getting the count out. There are 325 federal programs that rely on census data, approximately $9 billion annually. These programs include those things that are extremely important right now. which are financial assistance, food assistance, medical assistance, housing assistance. Next slide. Again, education, housing, core services that are vital to our communities, especially during this time, rely on the census. And so we take these numbers very seriously. When you're talking in the several hundred billions, those are very serious numbers that have a huge impact on the lives of our children. So these numbers that you see from the Urban Institute are, just keep in mind that they were estimated, very good. They were estimated during a time when we didn't have a crisis and a pandemic at hand. So even before the current threat to our nation, we had a threat of Black residents being undercounted by 3.68%, which equates to 1.7 million. The estimates from the Urban Institute show that we risk losing $1,600 in funding every year for each resident that is not counted. Okay. Birth to age 4 for Black children. This is a time when the risk of undercounting is the greatest. And one of the first, I moved here from Chicago, as you heard in my bio, and one of the first meetings I came to when I moved to DC was about the census. It was Tim's colleagues at the Census Bureau bringing together advocates and saying, listen, we need to focus in on the undercount of children of color. This is an issue that's actually getting worse and not better. We're not progressing the way we like to in counting children 0 to 5. Next slide. So again, driving home the point about the types of programs that would lose funding, SNAP programs, cash assistance, school lunch, those Title I funds that allow us to improve education in places where the tax revenue does not provide the level of education that we want, and childcare programs, all vital services, all the things that you're hearing about that are essential to families right now. 1 million children were missed in the 2010 census. This is something that Tim already mentioned, but here are some of the reasons that research is telling us families are missed. Submitting the census, they didn't know about young children, so we'll keep driving home this point this evening. No child is too young. If your child's a week old, 2 weeks old, no child is too young to be counted. Children who live with 2 parents and didn't know which parent should count the child. Children who are living with grandparents and grandparents thought, well, they're living here temporarily. Maybe mom or dad is gonna count the child. Young children that are not related to the primary caretaker. So especially again, 0 to 5, you have to think about the fact that for when children are young, families are young. And so their housing situations, it's a little bit more tentative during that time in a family's life. And so they may be living with others who aren't going to think to count them, and not in any way where they're not thinking of them, but just because they're thinking this is a temporary living situation. And then people who, again, right now may not be in their city of residence because the reasons in our normal world would be because of incarceration, or we talked about folks that are away at school. And so there are a myriad of reasons why you may not be at your household for periods of time during the census, but we need folks to be thinking, especially during this time, about being counted. Again, before we had these estimates around COVID-19, we knew that we were at risk of undercounting young children 0 to 5 at a rate of about 3 million young children. And so what do we ask advocates, to do, and those who care about children and families, what are we asking them to do? We're asking them to reach out to their city council members, asking to reach out to elected officials, just to ensure that, sorry, I have a full house this evening. Have a stepson also playing his video games as well. So we want to ensure that that we have the resources to conduct the census, and as the needs change, as Tim was saying, in this unpredictable time, as the needs change, that we keep the census and the needs that that are related to the census on the radars of our elected officials as well. So again, continuing to get out the count, educating anyone you know. We talk about the fact that the Black community has been historically undercounted, and that puts Black families just in a tough situation due to the lack of resources and lack of services that then causes. So our recommendations, and we'll get to the importance of pediatricians to this, but educate families about the importance of the census. This list now sounds ridiculous as you're looking at it. So we can keep moving on, but in any way that you're engaging in our new reality, ensure that, look at all these people way too close to each other in this picture. But as we're looking at the new reality, we can all be creative. I've sent out mass text to my family members, to friends, to anyone who'll listen about the census. And then easing local doubts. Tim alluded to this, that there is a potentially a mistrust of completing the census, that there may be some people who the census worker saying, you can trust us, you can give us your information, may not work for them. But we know, particularly in Black communities, that pediatricians are make over easier than the folks that'll be reaching out related to the census. Encouraging folks to respond early is one thing that we think, again, is extremely important, because if anyone's nervous about someone knocking on their door, we try to gently tell them that, well, you can prevent that by participating on the phone or online. And then it actually is a win-win for your family, keeping your family safe right now. And then again, for the census, because you ensure that you're counted, and they have that data knowing that you're counted, and they don't need to send someone out for that outreach. Where we have computers available, where you can make a computer available in your office, a tablet, so that if you are encouraging folks to use the census or have some information up about the census, a family could complete it right there in your office. This is extremely important. I saw in the chat a note about people that don't have access to computers. Places that can provide access to computers will be extremely important right now. And there'll be, in some places, there'll be few places that families can access. And so we sometimes use the language hard to count. We hear it pretty often. I just caution people not to use hard to count out in the community, only because to me, it sounds pretty scolding. It sounds like, listen, there's something that Black families just aren't doing right when it comes to the census. You want people to know it's not that you're hard to count necessarily. It's just that there's a way that we have to, that globally strategies have been organized that makes it more difficult in certain communities. And also homelessness plays a factor. I mean, there are just so many things that complicate a family's life that we have to be cognizant of. But using you need to do this because you guys are hard to count we just like to stay away from that language. And so again, we talked about the issue of a transient living situation. Unfortunately, those early years in a child's life can be the hardest years financially on parents. So we just want to make sure, especially for families that you're engaging with, that have a living situation that is unstable, that it may sound insensitive to talk to them about being counted. But again, ensuring that housing services are available in their community. A lot of that, again, relies on the census. And then meeting Black families where we are. This is why we're taking the time to speak with all of you, really because it's so important that those in the community that are trusted encourage folks to complete the census. And again, lastly, research shows that if our families aren't talking to anyone else, they are seeing their doctors. They are going to the pediatrician. If there's no other trusted source outside the home, we know that that family is engaging with pediatricians. And so, as much as you can, promoting in your offices, doing that encouragement through direct engagement, through the conversations you're having with families, is going to be extremely important. And again, that's in regular circumstances. In the current reality, it's even more important because there just may be very few families probably are pretty isolated right now. So the people that they are seeing and engaging with, I would consider pediatricians really on the front lines. And thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. I wasn't multitasking very well, so.
No, that was so great. Thank you. And, you know, we really, as pediatricians, understand the multitasking and the challenges of being a full-time parent as well as doing a full-time job. So thank you. You know, I really loved your point, C. Marie, about meeting the families where they are and making sure that our language is appropriate. You know, that's not a question. I just more of a statement that, you know, I really appreciate that. At this time, I'm seeing several questions. Are there questions that our folks want to ask C. Marie? As they're typing them in, this was just another consideration of one of our members, which I thought was just interesting, that there is some surprise on the census language that the gender question is binary. And so maybe future censuses would consider other ways for persons to self-identify. Rather than just two choices. Right,
I think that's a very important point. As much as we want to be inclusive, and I see that the Census Bureau is ensuring that everyone knows about the census. One of the ways that we can be inclusive is just having lots of options for people to identify themselves. I think that's a wonderful point.
And then, C. Marie, I feel like you answered this question already a little bit in your presentation, but one of our kind of senior members, she's the lead for the senior section of the DCAAP, is asking the best way to reach persons who don't have maybe technology or computers. Do you have any other suggestions?
So it would be encouraging them to call in, and I didn't say that. So also having a phone available and the phone numbers with different languages. Tim talked about that that paper that comes out with the website and the phone numbers for people to call is extremely important. I also think about the fact that everyone doesn't have a phone. So again, if they're in your office and there's a way to make a phone available for people to complete the census, it's usually about 10 minutes. That's extremely important.
That's really great. And I also liked your slide. I know that you said, oh, well, a lot of this isn't relevant now. So hopefully somewhere in the next few months it will
Yeah.
be. But, you know, any kind of other off the cuff suggestions of ways that we can reach our patients and our families. I actually love this final slide that, you know, you feel that some of the Black parents and families trust their pediatricians. You know, that warms my heart a little bit, not to be cheesy, but it's great to know that, you know, our encouragement matters to patients and families. Are there any other strategies that you would ask the pediatricians employ either in their community or their office?
I think about pharmacists are likely folks that are engaging that are in positions to be as trusted and engaging with families right now as well. And so where you can mention this to your colleagues in pharmacies as well, I think will be important. But yeah, wherever families gather is an opportunity to talk about the census. Health fairs around this time would be that time, but it may be that once we get into the summer and we're thinking about back to school, and you're starting to see more families again, folks are starting to gather again, folks are starting to have those back to school fairs and health fairs, that will be a great time to keep the census in mind. And to look up some information. I'm sure Tim has left us with a list of great websites that we can check to keep ourselves abreast of where they are in the census count at that point, but that certainly will be an option. That back to school is kind of a time when parents are checking off the boxes and checking off their to-do list of the important things that they need to be thinking about for their child. And so the census will definitely be one.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. And actually, you know, pediatricians are already trying to be forward thinking about kind of downstream effects that COVID is having on our patients. So we've been canceling and postponing some well child checks, and that means that some of our children aren't being immunized right now. And so we're already trying to think about additional health fairs and immunization clinics that we're going to have to hold, especially before school starts in the fall. You know, also with consideration that DC is moving towards no shots, no school. And so maybe this would be an opportunity for the census to pair with pediatricians as we ramp up some of those clinics after we're able to be socially close again.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. And then C. Marie, one last question for you. One of our members asks, are there any influential social media folks that NBCBI, I think I got that right, is engaging in this period of time where social distancing is creating, you know, problems? So, you know, an opportunity to create content on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter.
Yes. So last week actually was Black Census Week. And so during that week, there was a lot that Roland Martin put on YouTube. So if you look at his content from last week, I mean, this is a great thing about social media. Those things from last week are still there in the archives and can be retweeted. You can look at, there were a bunch of organizations that taped video. So if you think about the organizations that are like premier in the Black community, think about the Urban League, NAACP, the CBC Foundation. If you're looking at those websites, you'll see information about the census, especially recently coming out of Black Census Week. So Roland Martin, NAACP, Urban League, CBC Foundation, and just your different Black caucuses, they're going to have information about the census on their social media, and we'll just continue.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, C. Marie.
Thank you.
So I'd like to take this opportunity to pivot to our community strategies discussion with a group of really fantastic panelists. Our panel moderator today is going to be DCAAP's own Diogo. She's our advocacy chair and will lead this discussion. Similar to our previous speakers, if you have questions for any of the panelists, please continue to write them in the Q&A section of this virtual discussion. Thanks.
Hi, thank you so much, Lenore. So I'm going to be introducing our three panelists, and then we'll go from the top level view where we kind of level set to talk about, what the census looks like, to start to talk about what we're doing in our communities to continue the outreach. So, and as I introduce the panelists, please go on ahead to turn on your cameras and your mic. So Chaya Merrill, she is the director of the Child Health Data Lab at Children's National Hospital. We have Helen Conway, who is the manager of program operations at one of our federally qualified healthcare centers, Mary Center. And then we have Melissa Bird, who is the executive director of the DC Census 2020, which is our census count in DC. So, hi everyone, are you all on, panelists?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your flexibility and adaptability with all of this. So I'm just going to start by having each of the panelists, if you could please describe what your efforts have been, in your current role leading Census 2020. And how have been some of the ways that you've adapted? Sorry, a little bit of feedback. Hello? Is that better? Hello?
Yeah.
Let's try back on. Muted. Hello?
Yeah, Diogo, you sound great. Go ahead.
Okay. I was just asking if the panelists could please describe their efforts in Census 2020 outreach, and also comment a bit about how it's changed, with the coronavirus pandemic. So we can just start with Melissa.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me on this. I am the executive director for DC Census 2020. So I work on behalf of DC government, and my role started in October of 2018, actually. Mayor Bowser has, sorry, I'm here, I don't know if that feedback is from me, but so I have been working on this for a year and a half and developing partnerships, and my goal and the goal of the city and the mayor is to count every single person one time in the right place. And we have done that, or we're hoping that we're doing that through creating partnerships. We have a grant program and just making sure that we engage in all of our historically undercounted communities. We have really focused a lot of our efforts on those communities. But as I always say, I never take anyone for granted, but this has been my full-time position for the last year and a half. And I'm certain that Helen and Chaya, who I both work with very closely in DC, everything changed 2 weeks ago. So we are still pivoting and re-strategizing on how we're moving forward, but we are gonna make it work.
That's all we can really have is hope, right? That's what keeps things going. So that's really great to hear that you have been doing this, for the last year, and that we're going to be continuing to adapt and to move forward. And so, Chaya, if you could share a bit about, what your role has been and with Census 2020 outreach.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Oh goodness. I'm going to try this again.
Chaya, if there are several receivers or people streaming in the same space as you, that might be causing feedback.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just me, and I don't have my audio on my computer. It's just my phone.
I think
I'm not sure.
It might be the phone and your computer that might be causing feedback.
Right, I don't have my computer audio on. I only have my phone.
Okay, oh, I see. Okay.
You know what, I'm gonna go ahead. If you wanna move to Helen,
okay.
I'm gonna try a couple things.
Okay, try that. So Helen, please share.
Yes, of course. Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really honored to be here and representing Mary Center. We are a federally qualified health center. We have 3 clinics in DC, wards 1, 4, and 5, and a variety of community outreach programs that sort of extend our reach throughout the entire city. Mary Center, through the leadership of our president and CEO, Maria Gomez, has been involved with the census in years past as well. In 2010, we were also very involved. Our involvement this time around with the support of, Melissa and her team and the DC Census, we are sort of an official community partner in the census, recognizing that we, have the honor and responsibility to be, engaging with our participant communities, our patients around these sort of more advocacy related issues that really matter, both for them to make sure that they have access to the resources that they need, and also for Mary Center as an organization, because we depend on accurate census data to ensure that we can provide the services that we do and expand our scope. So our efforts have really, myself as sort of the project lead, working really closely with my colleagues in marketing and communication. It's just sort of been all about meeting our participants where they're at, which was a theme in our, the most recent presentation we heard, which I think is a really important takeaway, is how can we meet our participants, our patients, our clients where they're at, and really drive home the importance of the census in their day-to-day life. So for us, it's been a lot about supporting our staff, right? Like, I don't work directly with our participants at Mary Center, so how do I make sure that our medical providers, our pediatricians, our social service providers all have the information that they need to be talking to our participants about this every day. And then of course, the marketing and communications aspect is then making sure our outwardly facing messaging is reflecting the importance of the census, why it matters to Mary Center, and why it's important, echoing Tim's messaging. It's easy, it's safe, all of those things. So our focus has really been about our participants, but we, we serve over 54,000 people every year and have over 700 staff members. So we feel that, just focusing on that alone is going to make a huge impact for the count in DC.
Thank you so much for sharing the education and the reach that you have, because each one, hopefully the hope is each one teach one, that you teach someone to then be able to pass on that information. Exactly. Let's try again with Chaya.
Okay, let's try this again. Can everyone hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, looks like I fixed it. Sorry about that. Again, my name is Chaya Merrill, and I'm with Children's National Hospital, and I'm the director of a child health data lab. And I've just been really fortunate to be able to have been connected with Melissa and her group. Melissa started a complete count committee for DC, which brings together many different people from across different sectors who are interested in making sure that we get an accurate count of all of our DC residents. Had been attending those meetings for a little while and realized at that point that there wasn't a subcommittee that was focused specifically on young children. So we worked with Melissa and her team to create this subcommittee that really specifically focuses on children that are 0 to 4 years of age. And as you've already heard through this evening, and I'm sure before as well, that young children are often the most likely to be missed on the census. So it seemed really appropriate that we dedicate some resources really specifically to that audience, the 0 to 4 year olds. So working at a children's hospital, we've done a lot since October, educating our staff, our providers, our support services, our clinics, to make sure that all of these people that are in constant contact with our parents, with people that are just not counted well on the census, making sure that they understand their role and making sure that children are included on the forms. Because often what happens is that parents will complete the forms, but they don't always include their kids on the form. So that's another complication. The message is a little bit nuanced when it comes to children, or even when we're talking to parents. It's not just complete the census, it's complete the census and make sure to include all of your children, babies as well, on the forms. So we've been just doing a ton of education. We've taken kind of a grassroots type of effort. We've been going to department meetings. We've been presenting at conferences. We've done grand rounds. We've been at the food bank. We've really done, I think, a pretty comprehensive job of reaching that population of influencers to make sure that young kids are counted.
And so with this, so it sounds like both from all three of you, prior to kind of the world as we knew it before the pandemic, there was a lot of outreach and education. And have you, and the hope is to modify and adjust that as we move on with this pandemic. What have been some things that have, surprised you from that, work that you did with education, or that is surprising you now as you're moving to kind of adapt the outreach that we're doing now that Census is live, over 50 million people have already filled it out online?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think one of the reasons I'm cautiously optimistic about us still having a successful count is that we did start this process so early. If we hadn't started outreach last fall, last summer, I think we would be in a much tougher position than we are right now. So, you know, up until about a month ago, we had probably been sharing information, again, meeting people where they are. Where are their street festivals, resource fairs, and different offices? We probably had 200 to 300 different events where census information had been made available. So we weren't just starting, you know, we weren't just launching our campaign right now. We had a whole, you know, education phase last fall. Our plan though for March and April was really to do probably close to 50 or 60 public facing events. And a lot of that was really taking computers, laptops, tablets into communities, into a lot of our community healthcare facilities so that people could have those resources, you know, right where they are. Obviously, all of those are either canceled or indefinitely postponed. So we are, you know, we are tapping into every partner that we have worked with. What else can we do to reach people? And it could be anything from phone banking, robocalls, text alerts, email alerts, putting a link to the 2020 census on your own website. If you know there's a lot of high traffic coming to it to get information. Again, where are we meeting people online? And that's tough because we know about 20% of DC residents do not have personal internet subscription. How are we reaching them? And I think we're hoping to do that through some robocalls, some phone banking. But we're all brainstorming sort of, even though we're all at home and we're socially distant, there are still a lot of active touch points within communities. And how can we tap into those that are still happening in a way that is safe? And as always, I tell everyone, like, the number one thing is that we practice safe social distancing. That is more important than anything right now. But we know there's a lot of meal deliveries going on. We've got about 5,000 in-home meal deliveries going on to seniors. So we're going to get information into those meals. We're doing the school lunch sites. There's a lot of other free grocery pickup sites where we can get information out. And it's just evolving. So we're just having to think creatively about, again, where are other touch points that we can share information in a way that is safe and it's being delivered by trusted messengers, whether it's at a school or a health clinic or one of our community partners.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask, you know, for both Helen and Chai, if you can comment on one of the points that Melissa brought up, which is one of the questions we really wanted to talk about, this being the first time that the census is online, and knowing that there is a digital divide, that there are parts in DC that don't have either access to internet or a computer. With this theme of meeting people where they are at, what is that, what does that look like for the efforts that you all are taking? And then I would follow up with Melissa to think about, are there going to be efforts, while there might not be internet access, individuals might have Wi-Fi, would there be opportunities to deploy places that would increase access to internet for people to be able to fill out the census on their phone? So I'll start with Helen and Chai in terms of, you know, census, online, digital divide. What does that look like in your outreach currently?
Sure, and you know, like so much of what's been said, I'll say a huge caveat that this is, you know, we're in the midst of figuring out how to sort of, you know, flex those creativity and adaptability muscles, because a big part of our plan was recognizing that digital divide is real for a lot of our participants. And so a big part of our plan was actually having tablets set up in our waiting rooms. That was going to be starting this week, maybe last week, and you know, utilizing staff members and, you know, community volunteers to actually be in our waiting rooms and supporting people as appropriate and filling out their form, because we recognize that with a lot of our participants, you know, we have a lot of participants who are very tech savvy, and that is very appealing to them, but we have a lot, whether it's because they're, you know, not as literate with technology, or they just have concerns about filling it out, or they would just need a little bit of extra hand holding, that we wanted to make that available. We recognize Mary Center as a safe space for people, right? We're familiar faces. So to me, that's been sort of the most disappointing aspect of all of this, is that that part of the plan is now, you know, not able to be enacted exactly. So, we are hopeful that at some point we have access to our clinics. We have one clinic in DC right now that's operational, but we're really utilizing telehealth as much as possible. So I think with that being said, similar to what Tim said and, other presenters, I think we're really focusing now on the phone option for people. Sorry, I have a dog in the house, the realities of this new life. The phone is an option, getting your form mailed to you. So really making sure that people are aware of those options. And we're still thinking through, I guess, exactly how we're going to tackle that now in this new, reality that we're in.
And so in addition to what Helen and Melissa said, one thing that we've really promoted with our staff at Children's is that all of our children's sites, the main hospital, the clinics, have free Wi-Fi. Most of our parents do come in with smartphones. Not all of them, but most of them do. I'm happy to say that I completed the census the day before the census was supposed to go live. On March 11th, I was very eager. I know the website was supposed to be open on March 12th, and I got online on my phone because I wanted to really specifically know myself how mobile friendly the app was. And if you haven't completed the census, I'll just make a little plug here. You should do it while you're on this call with us right now. It only takes 5 to 7 minutes. It took me 6 minutes and 43 seconds for a family of 4. But what I really want to say is that the form is very mobile friendly. So it's very easy for individuals when they're at our clinics, at our hospitals, to complete it online free of charge with our free Wi-Fi. So that's one thing. We've already talked about the phone option, which I don't think is getting as much media attention. So I think that's really important that people understand that there's a phone number, not just to ask questions about the census, but to actually complete the form. And the phone number is available in 13 different languages. So it's English, Spanish, and 11 other languages. So we have the majority of languages covered as well. So I think that's a great option, not just because of computer access, but there may be computer literacy issues as well as health literacy issues as well. And then lastly, I'll mention that if you have not completed the census by phone or via the internet, you will be receiving a paper form. So that's another option when you receive the paper form next week, to take a few minutes to complete the form the old school way, which is a great way to do it. We know that many of our neighborhoods in wards 7 and 8 actually received a paper form to begin with, because we knew, the Census Bureau knew, that those are areas that don't have really strong internet access. So many of our families actually are already completing the census by paper.
And I just want to add, so when we look at the data every day from the US Census, we are seeing sort of across the city, our current response rate today is 32%, and nationwide it's 34%, 34.7, I think. We are seeing that the majority, overwhelming majority of DC households are using the internet option. I would say it's probably about 98%. You do see a difference though in wards 7 and 8, where it's probably closer to about 80% using the online option, and the rest are using phone or paper. So the folks who do have the access to online or smartphone, they do seem to be able to utilize it. I've been surprised at how high that response is, but I agree. I think we need to just really keep messaging about the phone option also for residents who are going to need more assistance with it, to make sure that they have that information.
Yes. Thank you. And I think one of the points I wanted to ask too, Helen, you mentioned, there's been a lot of, and also at Children's National, we've been moving a lot of our care to telehealth. With the messaging, especially because you run marketing, and so you're really helping in terms of the messaging and things that are being put out either on your organization's website or scripts that are coming together. Has there been thought or discussion about putting in a word, though there's just so much that's being handled during these visits, either while people are waiting for their provider to arrive to the visit, or during the visit or at the end of the visit to say, hey, please fill out the census. Has there been some of that work happening?
Absolutely. So, to your earlier question about sort of what surprised me about the sort of pivot of strategy is, for us at Mary Center, so much of our work in this particular moment was going to be in our clinics, the workflows, the providers with the patient. Hey, have you filled out your census? Like, we have someone in the waiting room, they can answer your questions. You can talk to one of our family support workers if you have more questions. And some of it has been really easy to map onto our telehealth workflows, right? Because it's not like we're just not talking to our patients, right? So we're still engaging with our patients, whether it's on the phone or via Zoom or whatnot. So a lot of that work is going to still continue. You know, we have to acknowledge the moment, and that, you know, our patients in particular, there's a lot going on in their worlds, just like there are for so many of us. So we have to be more strategic and careful about, it's really simple, really quick messaging around the census. What's the most important thing we want to say? Hey, you can do this over the phone, you can do it online, you don't have to leave your house, you can avoid someone coming, and still doing it every time we talk to a patient. That's our goal, and sort of the expectation that we have is that every time we're engaging with a participant, it's just a different method now. We are talking about the census just as we would be doing if we were in our clinics right now.
Yes. And just to plug, you know, you can't really see it here, but I think you know, one of the things we've seen, and I was going to have tried a little bit about, you know, some of the work she's been doing with the census ambassadors in terms of getting, you know, clinicians involved. And, you know, this pin, thank you so much, Melissa, for making so many of these pins
I
here.
have probably 500 sitting here in my home office. So if we can figure out a safe way, I can get more to you.
Yeah, because one of the things, you know, when we talk about, you know, one of the things that happens now is that with the video, people are looking around at, you know, people's surroundings or noticing things. So to the point that you mentioned, Helen, what are some of the subtle ways that we can work it into this conversation? I find that this pin can be, you know, something that, you know, if we're in our telehealth visits or, you know, any other things that we're doing virtually that we can wear, that can again be something that could strike up conversation at the end or at the beginning, recognizing that we're meeting people where they are physically, mentally, and emotionally. So that was one of the questions I kind of wanted to ask, and also our little pin, it's been really great. And so the next question, you know, talking about meeting people where they are, helping to address fears. You know, Tim talked about, you know, there is no citizenship question. Knowing that DC, again, we serve a diverse population, and there are our immigrant families that we're hearing so many mixed messaging on this now non-existent citizenship question. There was the public charge rule change that people are still trying to understand, and that there's a lot of confusion with that. How have your efforts, you know, with census outreach been addressing and allaying those fears? And in particular, what guidance would you give to us as pediatricians as we continue in that census outreach? I wanted to start with you, Helen, especially because you work at Mary Center, where you serve a large Spanish-speaking population.
Yes. So this, you know, from the very beginning, you know, we started our work in August. So that was sort of just after, I think it was in the summer that the citizenship question sort of was on the table. So that was like the first conversation we ever had around our census engagement was around this question. You know, we've experienced the same challenges with all the changes to public charge and how we make sure that our community understands what that actually means. So I think what I've noticed in our work since August is sort of two messages have really resonated well with our participants who, you know, are perhaps undocumented or no undocumented immigrants, right? One is like, we consider our staff to be our greatest resource in this effort. Like we've said many times, doctors, pediatricians are especially trusted, and I think that goes for immigrant communities as well. So really making sure that just I made sure my staff can understand, because I still had staff who had questions about it because the news was just very confusing. And there was just a lot of misinformation. So if our providers at Mary Center and our staff can really understand there's no citizenship question, the census will not ask you this, and they can feel comfortable saying that to our participants, because we all take our roles very seriously. So one was just making sure that our staff understood. The second piece of information, which this actually kind of surprised me, but it has actually really resonated when, we've been talking with our participants in the community, is actually not going into a lot of detail, but actually helping people understand how the census shares data. Because you can say, oh, there's no citizenship question, but you're still your name and your date of birth, and that can still be very fear-inducing for people, because it feels like, well, why would you need this information if, I don't want to give this information because I could potentially get in trouble. So actually really simple talking points about, when the data is shared to help make sure you get these resources, it's not shared with your, is shared in these big blocks. Melissa actually does a great job of explaining, and I think I just like sort of started parroting everything she said in all her presentations. It's shared in these big blocks. It's not meant to sort of, you know, your individual information is not shared. It's really about creating statistics. And that actually in our presentations with people has been really useful to help them sort of reconcile, okay, you're saying it's safe and there's no question, but still then why are you asking me all these questions? That to some people can feel very invasive. Like, why are you asking me if I'm of Hispanic, you know, or Latino origin? And that talking point has actually been really useful for us at Mary Center.
Yeah, I can see Melissa smiling a little bit. She feels like a proud parent. She's like, my outreach and my efforts have been so well done.
We didn't plan for a pandemic. We planned for everything else.
The pandemic. And so before I let you talk about that, I was going to also have Chaya in terms of, you know, outreach to, you know, allay fears, especially among immigrant populations, not just those who speak Spanish or who are of Latino and Hispanic origin, but also, you know, thinking about like Afro-Caribbean and all, you know, Ethiopian and Eritrean communities, and what has that looked like in terms of addressing fears in your census outreach efforts?
Yeah, I absolutely love the points that Helen made. I think those messages are really important. I'll add just one more that seems to have worked really well for us, is really making sure people understand that if you want to avoid having the census enumerators or census takers come to your neighborhood, which I think is a fear for not just our immigrant and undocumented communities, but a lot of our other communities that are harder to count, have been undercounted in the past. I can tell you myself, I wouldn't want to answer the door to a census taker. It's just not the society we live in right now. One way to avoid that from happening is self-response. So that's one of the messages that I think has been helpful to us. You know, it is required by law. That is another message that I feel even people that are fairly well-versed on the census seem to still ask, like, well, is it really required? I mean, is it required? Is this a law by law? And I was like, absolutely, it's 100% required. And if you don't complete it, there's a very high likelihood that there will be people coming to your door trying to collect this information. And to avoid all of that, just take the 5 minutes to complete it yourself. We've also used some of the guidance from the Census Bureau directly. There's a lot of great guidance out there in terms of responding to people who have fears and reassuring them about the data security issues, and also how the data can and cannot be used. And this is a little bit of what Helen said, that Melissa has taught all of us so much about this. But the fact that it cannot be shared outside of the Census Bureau, it cannot be used by immigration services or the FBI. I found that it's really helpful to look at some of the research that the Census Bureau has done. They've done some, I think it's the Attitude and Motivators survey, where they really talk to a good group of people to find out what prohibits people, what are the barriers to responding to the census. And we find that a really high percentage, I think it's upwards of 60% of people, have fear that the FBI can use this information to track people, to track criminals, that the immigration services can use this information. So depending on the audience, I feel like getting into those details helps, as well as the fact that there are fines associated with anyone who would potentially release this data, pretty large fines, $250,000, I believe, and potentially up to 5 years of prison. So I think they start, you know, depending on how deep you want to get into this conversation, it starts becoming really clear how serious the Bureau is taking the privacy issue and the lack of sharing the information.
Anything else to add, Melissa?
Well, just add that I want to thank Mary Center and Children's National Health for being amazing partners. I think that really is what will lead us to success, is understanding exactly what just Chai said. You have to tailor your message and think about the messenger and the platform that you're delivering that message. So, you know, we have a branded citywide campaign, and you'll see it on buses and on TV, radio. But if you are really fearful of the government, that is not going to be enough. I mean, it really has to be at that block level, at your front door, in your community group. And that is what we have spent the last year and a half building, is really, you know, we have 16 community-based organizations that we've provided grant money to, groups that have a proven track record in these communities that are, I'm not going to be the trusted messenger in a lot of communities. And I know that. And I feel like my role is just to sort of help empower partners to talk about it. And that hasn't changed. So even though we are all kind of rethinking very quickly how we're engaging, we still know that the partners are really how we will be successful. And I also want to add that people can self-respond throughout the entire census. So Yes, everything is canceled, or as I like to say, you know, indefinitely postponed, but I do hope that at some point we'll all be back outside again. And, you know, we could still do a public event. I have 50 tablets sitting back here in my office. I could take those out somewhere in June or July. You know, we're going to go all the way to the end. And the census has extended this to August 14th. We will keep messaging that, you know, you can still self-respond any day until August 14th. Again, you know, people are going to be afraid to open the door for someone. They can still do this themselves. So we're not done just because the enumerators start coming out.
Yes, that's a really good point. And I think one of the attendees asked a question that Tim has already answered in the Q&A box, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone heard in terms of, you know, people are going to be able to self-respond all the way till August. And that's the best information, is you giving that yourself instead of someone knocking on your door. Just to clarify that, you know, while people might be getting, you know, the invitations in the mail, especially one of the questions that someone asked about not being able to read the language, you can actually go online. There's no need to actually wait for the ID. You can go online, put in that information, and on the back end, they can, you know, reconcile those resources. So when in doubt, just fill it out, and they'll worry about, you know, putting all those things together. You do not need to wait for the ID. How has that messaging been going over with participants and collaborators in the census outreach?
I can say it's been a little bit of a challenge. I think some folks, I mean, the upside of DC is there's a lot of data nerds here. People love the census, they're excited, they filled it out as soon as they got it. I think a lot of folks have said to me, I lost it. I lost the unique ID. So we are actually kind of really pushing a big message this week on social media. It's okay if you lost that unique ID, you can still go online right now and put in your address. You can call and provide your address. If you have the ID, great. It makes it a faster process on the US Census end of things, but we're gonna just really start pivoting to fill it out, put your address in. I think that has actually kept quite a few people who do have good online access from completing it.
Okay, so when in doubt, fill it out. Worry about who, you know, if it's duplicated, it's better that we count you twice than we don't count you at all. Just fill it out and they'll figure out, and there are smart statisticians on the back end that can make this work. One of the panelist questions also was why, and I think we've kind of hit it a bit from both our national panelists as well as with our local experts, that this is about money, power, and allocation of resources, right? It affects our community health centers as well as our hospitals and a lot of the great things that we do in our communities. So with that, the last question that I have before I open it up for other people to ask a few more questions, and you all have kind of touched on it a bit, is what would you say is the most important action, you know, in this world that we're living in now, but also knowing that there will be a version that will hopefully come at another time in the summertime. What is the most important action that you believe physicians can take to ensure that kids are not undercounted in this 2020 census?
So we've created a program at Children's National, and it's now expanded beyond children's, asking people to be a census champion for children. So I'm answering this in a roundabout way, Diogo, but I think it's really important for folks, and not just pediatricians, but pediatricians I think are a great example of this, to really commit to the fact that they are influencers of parents, and they are different than a lot of the other populations out there. Parents do trust you. To be a census champion for children, we essentially just say it's three things. We need you to educate yourself about the issue. We need you to share the information with others. And then we use a very specific word that has made a difference for me when I talk about this. We ask people to urge, not suggest to parents, not mention to parents that there's a census out there, but treat this issue with a sense of urgency. So when you talk to parents, you know, make sure to use the right words about how important this is. And you really use that kind of language. I think it makes a huge difference. And I think wearing those buttons sounds like such a simple thing, but I'll tell you that I wear the button that Diogo showed everybody around the hospital as well. And sometimes I have to take the button off because I can't walk but 5 feet without someone asking me about the census. And I've had some really incredible conversations that I think have been impactful. not just with our physicians and clinicians, but a lot of our support staff as well. So making sure that we're engaging folks like our cashiers in our cafeterias, our environmental services folks, our janitors. I mean, these are the folks that are in the hospital in our setting that are interfacing with our population and our parents daily, often more than many of us are on a day-to-day basis. And those buttons are just a really easy way to open up the conversation and have that discussion.
Thank you. Helen?
Sure, I agree 100% with everything that Chaya said, and the button, I wear mine as well, or I did when I was, working in the clinic, and it was a great conversation starter. And I was just gonna basically say the same thing. When I think about the most important thing, I think it's meeting people where they're at, which has been said so many times. So, and that looks different right now. I'm very hopeful that once we get back into our clinics, we'll be going to our WIC breastfeeding club groups that happen every month. We'll be going to our participant baby showers, we'll be doing all of these things and thinking about all the ways in which we have, engagement points with our participants and not just in the exam room. That's important. And I echo what Chaya said about the strong language and the urgency rather than just like, oh, you'll get something in the mail, like make sure you look at it, like really helping people understand. For us at Mary Center, it's, those groceries that you get with your WIC dollars when you leave this appointment, like that's connected to the census and really connecting it to Mary Center in a very positive way. Because people love Mary Center, just like, they love their providers at Children's for a lot of different reasons, and really bringing it down to the level of it's not just this sort of like big scary thing associated with the government. It's Mary Center, it's your child's school, it's all of these things. I think that's probably the most important action.
And obviously I defer to Helen and Chaya about what pediatricians and doctors and clinicians should be talking about. Also, I think it's really important now more than ever, and we have tried to make this connection, but certainly the tie-in between census, good data, and public health in general. I was not aware of how important this data is to public health professionals until a year ago. And it never crossed my mind about how information is tracked over time, how decisions get made about expansion of beds and staffing and where to locate community healthcare centers. This, even pre-COVID, this is critical information to healthcare, not only in DC, but across the country. We are certainly also talking now about post-COVID recovery and how important accurate data will be, because we will at some point be in a post-COVID world. And I think a lot of community health clinics and hospitals are going to be looking at data more than ever to think about how do we plan for this? What happens next time? What could we do differently? And my job in the city and my background is in urban planning, is like, we're already thinking about our post-COVID recovery right now for the city. We've got to have that data. It's critical for what we do now all the way through 2021 and 22 as we recover.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, really talking about, again, we've said that the census is about money, power, and allocation of resources, and that piece of that allocation of resources being an opportunity to really bring home the personal message, right? So for us, for me in clinic, when I do see the patients who are able to come, because we are still seeing some young children who need to be vaccinated, or even in telehealth when we're doing the social, talking about, what are resources that you're receiving, being able to tie it for the family who is on WIC or who is on SNAP or is in a Title I school, and a positive messaging, like you said, Helen. And like you said, this, CDC is using this information for identifying the vulnerable population. And so, while we're managing the pandemic that is current, we're kind of being asked to do two things as once: be here in the present and also look forward and plan for that. And that's a lot to ask, but that's another way in which we realize how critical the census is. Well, I just want to thank you all so much. I just wanted to ask if there were any last questions from our group before I turned it over to our last comments. Any takers from our participants?
I Let me pull the chat box up.
Yeah, I pulled the chat box up. I don't see anything in the Q&A, and I don't see anything else here. So with that, hi! You were counted in the census too, little one. So yeah.
You got counted.
Yes, we love kids, so we welcome them all to join us in the how do you tell families? I think we answered that question. Okay, so I will now turn this over to Dr. Christian Cornejo, who serves as our interim DCAAP Vice President, to close us out. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Let's see. Okay. Well, I would like to thank the keynote speakers, our local leaders, our sponsors, the Manuel Family Foundation, the American Data Association Northeast, and especially the Planning Committee. Thank you, Diogo. Thank you, Lenore. Thank you, Mansi. Thank you, Tysas. I would also like to thank each of you for attending this important symposium. In these very trying times, and despite our preoccupation with COVID, we have heard from all of you on the importance of the census in providing our communities with the best care possible. Please remember to complete your survey. Through the survey, we will get your feedback on the symposium, but also will allow us to know more about your community needs as related to the census and related to COVID. We endeavor to provide you with the resources that you need. The last thing I wish to do is to urge each of you to get involved in the DC chapter of the AAP. Now more than ever, we need you. COVID-19 has pushed many of our issues to the forefront, but there are some underlying issues that require our constant attention, such as childhood vaccination. How can we continue to push these and other very important public health messages forward? We need to hear from you. Thank you for attending. Happy Doctor's Day. And please remember, every child counts. Thank you, everybody.